August 15, 1973. Bruce Lee had been filming for 14 hours straight. The Hong Kong soundstage hit 110 degrees. Jackie Chan stood 3 feet away when the dragon collapsed. What Jackie whispered to the unconscious legend became the most buried secret in martial arts cinema. Studio executives paid 7 figures to bury the footage. For 50 years, they succeeded. William Chen's hands trembled as he held the film canister, the metal cold against his palms despite the suffocating heat of the Shaw Brothers vault. 50 years of archiving films had taught him to recognize the weight of history, but this felt like holding dynamite. The vault's fluorescent lights flickered, casting shadows that danced across decades of stored memories. Somewhere in the building above, footsteps echoed through the corridors. Heavy boots. Security making their rounds or something else entirely? William's heart hammered against his ribs as he stared at the faded label. Outtakes. Destroy. The handwriting was unmistakable. Raymond Chow's distinctive scrawl, the studio executive who'd built an empire on Bruce Lee's legend. Chow had been dead for 15 years, but his orders apparently lived on. The canister had been hidden behind a false wall that William had discovered purely by accident. A loose brick, a hollow sound when his elbow knocked against it while reaching for a misplaced reel. Inside the hidden compartment, wrapped in oiled cloth like a corpse, lay this single canister that someone had desperately wanted to disappear forever. 18 minutes of footage. William had watched it 3 times in the privacy of his basement office, his world shifting with each viewing. The camera angle was wrong, positioned behind the main crew capturing what they thought was dead space, but dead space sometimes held the most life. He could still see Jackie Chan's 19-year-old face in perfect clarity, the way it had transformed the instant Bruce Lee hit the concrete. No surprise, no panic, just a terrible, knowing recognition that made William's stomach turn. And then Jackie had moved with purpose, kneeling beside Bruce, whispering something that the distant microphone had barely caught, but the camera had recorded with brutal honesty. The footsteps above grew closer. William stuffed the canister into his messenger bag, his movements quick and silent. 30 years as a stuntman before becoming an archivist had taught him how to move like a ghost when necessary. Tonight, it felt very necessary. He killed the lights and pressed his ear to the vault door. The hallway beyond was supposed to be empty. He had the only security code for this section. But someone was out there, and they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. William thought of his old friend Tommy Liu, the best friend whose trust he'd lost in 1973 over secrets just like this one. Tommy had tried to warn him then about digging too deep, about asking the wrong questions. Some stones should stay unturned, William, Tommy had said the last time they'd spoken. Some truths are too expensive. Now William understood the price Tommy had been talking about. The footage didn't just contradict the official story of Bruce Lee's final days, it shattered it completely. If what Jackie had whispered was true, if what the camera had captured was real, then everything the world believed about Bruce Lee's death was a carefully constructed lie. The footsteps stopped directly outside the vault. William's breathing slowed to almost nothing as he heard the soft beep of someone entering a security code. The wrong code, judging by the angry buzz that followed. Then another attempt. Closer this time. He had maybe 2 minutes before they tried the master override. Moving in complete darkness, William navigated by memory to the vault's secondary exit, a service corridor that connected to the building's old pneumatic tube system. It hadn't been used in decades, but it led to the parking garage 2 floors below. He'd discovered it during his first month on the job and had kept the knowledge to himself, a habit that was about to save his life. The vault door's electronic lock chirped softly. They were in. William squeezed into the service corridor just as the lights blazed to life behind him. He heard voices now. 2 men, speaking in rapid Mandarin. They knew exactly where to look, heading straight for the false wall he'd exposed. This wasn't a random security check. Someone had been watching him. As he crawled through the narrow passage, the messenger bag's strap caught on a bolt, nearly tearing. William's heart seized. If the canister fell, if it broke, 50 years of lies would remain buried forever. He carefully worked the strap free and continued his escape, the weight of history pressing against his back. The garage was empty when he emerged. his car exactly where he'd left it 3 hours ago. But as he crossed the concrete toward his vehicle, William noticed something that made his blood freeze. His car's front tire was flat, not punctured, deflated. Someone had let the air out slowly, quietly, while he'd been in the vault. They'd wanted him trapped inside the building. William clutched the messenger bag tighter and ran for the emergency exit. Behind him, he could hear elevator doors opening, voices echoing in the garage. The hunt had begun, and the most dangerous secret in martial arts cinema was riding on his ability to stay ahead of people who'd already killed once to protect it. The footage would either vindicate Bruce Lee's true legacy or get William Chen buried alongside it. The emergency exit alarm shrieked behind William as he burst onto Nathan Road, Hong Kong's neon arteries bleeding red and gold into the pre-dawn darkness. His lungs burned from the sprint, but he forced himself to slow to a casual walk. Just another old man navigating the night market stragglers and early morning commuters. The messenger bag felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds against his hip. Breathe, he told himself. Think like a stuntman. Control the fall. William's reflection caught in a shop window. Gray hair disheveled, sweat staining his collar, eyes wide with the kind of fear he hadn't felt since 1973. He looked exactly like what he was, a 68-year-old man who'd stolen something that could get him killed. The weight of Jackie's whispered confession echoed in his memory as he ducked into a 24-hour tea shop, the familiar smell of jasmine and steamed buns wrapping around him like childhood. He needed somewhere safe to think, somewhere to plan his next move. The elderly proprietor barely glanced up from her newspaper, and William settled into a corner booth where he could watch the street. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Lily in Vancouver. Dad, haven't heard from you in weeks. Kids asking when Grandpa visits next. Call me? William stared at the message, his throat tightening. Lily had been 7 when her mother died, all serious eyes and questions he couldn't answer. Now she had children of her own, Emma, 5, who insisted on hearing his old stunt stories, and little David, who just started walking and called him Gong Gong in a voice that melted his heart. They were supposed to visit next month. He'd already bought Emma the traditional Chinese puzzle box she'd been wanting, had planned to teach David how to make paper boats like he'd taught Lily all those years ago. Simple pleasures, quiet moments that felt more precious than any film reel. But that was before tonight. Before the footage that could destroy everything. The tea shop's television murmured in the background, showing the morning news. William's blood chilled as he recognized the building he'd just escaped. Security breach at the Shaw Brothers archive facility. Police investigating possible theft of valuable materials. His hands shook as he typed back to Lily. Everything fine. Love you all. Will call soon. It was probably a lie. The truth sat in the messenger bag beside him, 18 minutes of footage that could rewrite martial arts history, but it could also make him disappear like others who'd gotten too close to the real story. William thought of the journalist in 1978 who died in a car accident after asking questions about Bruce Lee's final days, the filmmaker in the 80s whose apartment had burned down along with his research. Coincidences that weren't coincidences. He pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. Himself and Tommy Lou on the set opposite of Fury, both young and invincible, matching grins beneath their stunt helmets. Tommy had saved his life that day when a fighting sequence went wrong, had pulled him clear of a falling light rig without a second thought. Best friends, brothers really, until William's curiosity had driven a wedge between them that 30 years hadn't closed. Some things are more important than truth, Tommy had said during their last argument. Family, safety, living to see your grandchildren grow up. William traced Tommy's face in the photo. His old friend ran a small martial arts school in Kowloon now, teaching kids basic forms and discipline. A quiet life, a safe life. The kind of life William had built too, until tonight. The morning light was growing stronger outside, and William knew he couldn't hide in the tea shop forever. His pursuers would be checking every camera, every exit, every place an old archivist might run, but they might not expect him to seek help from someone who'd cut ties decades ago. His finger hovered over Tommy's number in his contacts. One call could bring his oldest friend into the crosshairs. One call could destroy the peace Tommy had built for himself. But the alternative was facing this alone, and William wasn't sure he was strong enough for that anymore. Through the tea shop window, he watched the city wake up. Vendors setting up their stalls, office workers hurrying past, children walking to school with their parents. Normal life continuing while he sat holding evidence that could shatter the legend of Bruce Lee. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 30 years preserving the past, and now the past was about to destroy his future. William closed his eyes and thought of Emma's laugh, of David's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, of all the quiet moments he stood to lose. Then he thought of Bruce Lee's final expression on that sweltering soundstage, the look of betrayal so raw it had burned itself into the film emulsion. Some truths demanded to be told, regardless of the cost. He picked up his phone and dialed Tommy's number. The phone rang once, twice. William held his breath, watching steam rise from his untouched tea as Hong Kong's morning chaos unfolded beyond the shop window. "Wei?" Tommy's voice was rougher than William remembered, scratched by decades of shouting instructions across training mats. "It's me." The words caught in William's throat. "After 30 years of silence, what did you say? How did you bridge 3 decades of wounded pride and buried friendship?" A long pause. In the background, William could hear the distant sounds of a martial arts class, young voices counting in Cantonese, the snap of fabric, feet moving across wooden floors. William. Not a question. Tommy had always been able to read him, even across phone lines. "You sound like a man calling from the edge of a cliff." "Maybe I am." William's fingers tightened around the phone. "I need to see you. It's about—" "Don't," Tommy's voice cut sharp. "Not over the phone. You know better." "Of course." William cursed his desperation. If they were monitoring the Shaw Brothers building, they'd be monitoring communications too. Every word could be recorded, analyzed, used against them both. "The old place," William said carefully, "where we used to practice." Another pause. The rooftop of the abandoned textile factory, where they'd spent countless hours perfecting their craft, spinning through the air above the city like young gods who believed they were immortal. Tommy would remember. 1 hour, Tommy said, and the line went dead. William stared at his phone, a mixture of relief and terror coursing through his veins. Tommy hadn't refused, but he also hadn't welcomed him back with open arms. The conversation had carried all the weight of their shared history, the friendship, the betrayal, the 30 years of silence that had followed. He was finishing his tea when his phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. William's blood turned to ice. They'd found him already. Mr. Chen. The voice was cultured, speaking English with a trace of American accent. "You have something that belongs to us." William's hand clenched around the phone. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." "I don't think so. You're sitting in the Morning Glory tea shop on Nathan Road, wearing a blue shirt and holding a messenger bag. You look tired, Mr. Chen. This doesn't have to be difficult." William's eyes snapped to the window. Across the street, barely visible in the morning crowd, stood a man in a dark suit speaking into a phone. Even at this distance, William could see the cold professionalism in his posture. "Who are you?" William whispered. Someone who knew Raymond Chow very well. Someone who spent 47 years making sure certain truths stay buried. "You've stumbled into something much larger than you understand." The man across the street began walking toward the tea shop, moving with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to violence. William shot to his feet, the messenger bag clutched tight against his chest. "What do you want?" "The footage, of course. And your silence. Permanently." The line went quiet for a heartbeat. "You have a lovely granddaughter, Mr. Chen. Emma, isn't it? 5 years old? Loves stories about her grandfather's adventures in the movies?" William's world tilted. His granddaughter's name in this stranger's mouth felt like a violation, a threat so precise it cut through every defense he'd built around his family. "If you hurt her, I won't have to if you're reasonable. Walk outside, get in the black sedan that's pulling up to the curb. We'll have a civilized conversation about your discovery, and everyone goes home safe." Through the window, William watched the sedan slide to a stop. The rear door opened, revealing darkness within. The man in the suit was 20 feet away now, close enough that William could see his face, middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of person who disappeared in crowds and left no impression except on the people he was paid to remember. "You have 10 seconds, Mr. Chen. After that, I make another phone call, and your granddaughter becomes collateral damage in a story that started before she was born." William's mind raced. The emergency exit at the tea shop's rear. The network of alleys that connected to the subway entrance 2 blocks away. Tommy waiting at the textile factory, unaware that his old friend was about to bring hell down on both their heads. But Emma's face rose in his memory, her gap-toothed smile, her complete trust that Grandpa could fix anything, make any story come out right. How could he explain to a 5-year-old that some stories had endings too terrible to accept? The man in the suit reached for the tea shop door. "I'm sorry," William said into the phone and smashed it against the table. The device shattered, taking with it his last connection to the people hunting him and the family he was trying to protect. There was no going back now. No quiet retirement, no peaceful visits with his grandchildren. The footage in his bag had just made him a dead man walking. William lunged toward the tea shop's kitchen, the sound of shattering plastic and ceramics still echoing behind him. The elderly proprietor looked up in alarm as he crashed through the swinging doors, her newspaper fluttering to the floor. "Duim Jew, sorry," he gasped, but she was already pointing toward the back exit, her weathered face tight with the kind of understanding that came from decades of living in a city where people sometimes needed to disappear quickly. The alley behind the shop reeked of grease and rotting vegetables, narrow enough that William could touch both walls with his outstretched arms. He ran anyway, the messenger bag bouncing against his hip with each desperate step. Behind him he heard the tea shop's front door chime, then raised voices, angry, urgent, closing in. His phone was gone, which meant no way to warn Tommy, no way to call Lily and tell her to take the children somewhere safe. The isolation hit him like a physical blow as he stumbled out of the alley onto a side street packed with morning vendors setting up their stalls. "Sook, sook. You okay?" A teenage boy selling newspapers looked at him with concern. William realized he was breathing hard, sweating despite the morning chill, looking exactly like what he was, a cornered animal. "Fine," he managed, forcing himself to slow down, "just late for something important." The boy nodded and went back to arranging his papers, but William caught him glancing back with worried eyes. Even strangers could see the fear radiating from him like heat. The subway entrance loomed ahead, and William allowed himself a moment of hope. Underground, in the maze of tunnels and platforms, he could lose himself among the commuters. Get to Kowloon, find Tommy, figure out what to do with 18 minutes of footage that had apparently made him enemy number 1 to people who commanded black sedans and knew his granddaughter's name. He was halfway down the stairs when his legs nearly gave out. Tommy, if they knew about Emma, if they'd been watching him long enough to know his family, then they knew about Tommy too. They'd know about the old friendship, the shared history, the places 2 former stuntmen might meet to discuss dangerous secrets. The textile factory wasn't a refuge. It was a trap. William grabbed the subway tunnel's handrail, passengers flowing around him like water around a stone. Everything he thought he understood about the situation crumbled. These people, whoever they were, had been planning for this moment. They'd known exactly how he'd react, where he'd run, who he'd turn to for help. "Excuse me," someone said behind him in English, and William's blood froze. The voice was different, younger, female, but the careful politeness carried the same threat as the man in the tea shop. He turned slowly. A woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, holding a phone with his shattered devices scattered remains visible on the screen. She'd taken a photograph of the wreckage he'd left behind. "Mr. Chen? I'm Sarah Kim from Asia Pacific News. I understand you've made an interesting discovery about Bruce Lee's final film, a journalist." William's mind reeled between relief and new terror. Not another operative, but potentially just as dangerous. How had word gotten out so quickly? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice betrayed him, cracking like a teenager's. Sarah Kim smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My source at the archive facility says you accessed a restricted vault last night. Security footage shows you leaving with materials that weren't properly logged out." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I also understand that certain parties are very eager to recover what you took." The commuters continued flowing past them, unaware that they were witnessing the slow-motion destruction of a 68-year-old man's carefully constructed life. "What do you want?" William asked. "The same thing every journalist wants, the truth." Sarah Kim's expression softened slightly. "But I also want you to live long enough to tell it. The people looking for you aren't interested in preserving history, Mr. Chen. They're interested in preserving their version of it. William studied her face, trying to read intent behind the professional mask. Could he trust her? Could he trust anyone? I have a colleague who runs a safe house, she continued quietly. Somewhere you can think, plan your next move without looking over your shoulder. But we need to leave now before… Mr. Chen. The voice came from behind him, calm and inevitable as gravity. William turned to see the man from the tea shop standing 10 feet away, no longer bothering to look unremarkable. His hand rested inside his jacket, and his eyes held the flat certainty of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Sarah Kim stepped protectively in front of William, her press credentials already in her hand. This man is under journalistic protection. No, the man said simply. He isn't. The footage felt like it was burning through the messenger bag, 50 years of lies pressing against William's ribs. Around them, the subway station continued its morning rhythm, hundreds of people pursuing their ordinary lives while extraordinary darkness closed in. The man in the suit stepped forward, his movement causing the morning commuters to unconsciously part around him like schools of fish avoiding a predator. William felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on his shoulders. 30 years of careful silence, of choosing safety over truth, of letting sleeping dragons lie. Ms. Kim, the man said, his voice carrying the patience of someone who'd done this many times before. I suggest you reconsider your involvement here. Journalism can be a dangerous profession in Hong Kong, especially for those who dig too deep into old stories. Sarah raised her press credentials higher, but William could see her hand trembling slightly. Mr. Chen has agreed to an exclusive interview about his archival work. Any interference with legitimate journalism is perfectly legal when it involves stolen property and matters of national security. The man's smile was winter cold. Mr. Chen took something that doesn't belong to him, something that could cause considerable embarrassment to parties who prefer their privacy, national security. The words hit William like a physical blow. He'd assumed the footage was valuable because of its historical significance, its revelation of Bruce Lee's final days. But if governments were involved, if the conspiracy reached that high, what really happened that day? William found himself asking, his voice barely above a whisper. What was so terrible that you've spent 50 years burying it? The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a moment of what might have been regret. You wouldn't understand. You weren't there when Hong Kong was a powder keg, when every revelation could spark riots, when protecting the peace meant protecting certain illusions. Illusions? The word tasted bitter in William's mouth. Bruce Lee was a symbol of pride for millions of people. They deserved to know. They deserved to keep their hero. The man's voice hardened. Some truths serve no purpose except destruction. The footage you stole shows the moment Bruce Lee learned he'd been betrayed by someone he trusted. It shows Jackie Chan's reaction when he realized what his silence had cost. Do you really think the world is better off knowing that one of their greatest legends died not from a brain aneurysm, but from the shock of discovering his closest allies had sold him out to the triads? The subway platform seemed to tilt around William Triads, the organized crime syndicates that had ruled Hong Kong's entertainment industry with iron fists and blood money. He thought of all the stories that had never made sense, the mysterious circumstances of Bruce Lee's death, the way certain people had risen to prominence afterward while others had disappeared, the whispered rumors that had followed Jackie Chan for decades despite his sterling public image. Jackie never wanted any part of it, the man continued, his voice almost gentle now. He was young, ambitious, desperate for his break in the industry. When they offered him a choice, cooperate or watch his career die before it started, what was he supposed to do? He never knew they planned to eliminate Bruce entirely. The confession you have on that footage is a 23-year-old man realizing he'd been used to destroy his idol. Sarah Kim was recording on her phone, her journalistic instincts overriding her fear. You're admitting to a conspiracy that… I'm admitting to nothing. The man's attention snapped to her device. Miss Kim, please put that away before I'm forced to confiscate it. But William was barely listening anymore. His mind was racing back through 30 years of carefully buried memories, moments that suddenly made horrifying sense. Tommy's desperate warnings to stay away from certain stories. The way older stuntmen would go quiet whenever Bruce Lee's final days were mentioned. The reason certain footage from that last incomplete film had been sealed away where only the most trusted archivists could access it. Tommy knew, he whispered. That's why he cut me off. That's why he spent 30 years teaching children instead of working in the industry. He was there that day, wasn't he? He saw what happened. The man nodded slowly. Mr. Liu was smart enough to understand that some secrets are too dangerous to carry. You should have learned from his example. A train was approaching, the rumble of wheels on tracks growing louder. William felt the messenger bag's weight against his hip. 18 minutes of footage that contained the final confession of a broken young man who would spend the rest of his life carrying the weight of an unintended betrayal. The safe house, he said quietly to Sarah Kim. Where is it? William, no, the man said, and for the first time his composure cracked. You don't understand what you're unleashing. The triads from that era still have connections, still have power. They've built empires on the foundation of Bruce Lee's legend. If this footage goes public, then maybe it's time for those empires to fall. The train pulled into the station, its doors hissing open. William grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the nearest car, the messenger bag clutched tight against his chest. Behind them, the man in the suit spoke urgently into a radio, his calm mask finally slipping to reveal the desperation underneath. The doors slid shut between them like a closing coffin lid. The train lurched into motion, and William pressed his back against the cool metal wall of the subway car, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sarah Kim stood beside him, her phone still clutched in her hand, the recording app's red dot pulsing like a warning beacon. We need to delete that, William said, nodding toward her device. Are you insane? Sarah's eyes blazed with the fever that only journalists understood. That man just confessed to 50 years of conspiracy. This is the story of the century. But William was staring through the train window at the platform they'd left behind, watching the man in the suit grow smaller in the distance. Something was wrong with his memory, a nagging inconsistency that had been eating at him since the moment the man had started talking about triads and betrayals. Jackie was 23 in 1973, William said slowly. So? I've seen every piece of documentation from Bruce Lee's final film, every call sheet, every production note. William's voice grew stronger as certainty crystallized in his mind. Jackie Chan wasn't even on that movie. He was working for Lo Wei's studio, doing bit parts in forgettable kung fu films. He and Bruce barely knew each other. Sarah lowered her phone, understanding dawning in her expression. Then who? The train's lights flickered, plunging them into momentary darkness before the emergency lighting kicked in. When William's eyes adjusted, he saw his own reflection in the blackened window, but also something else. A figure moving through the car behind them, methodical and patient. He lied, William whispered, the full scope of the deception hitting him like a physical blow. Everything he just told us was a lie. Jackie Chan was never involved. The triads, the betrayal, the confession, none of it happened the way he described. The memories he'd been suppressing for 30 years came flooding back with crystalline clarity. The real footage he'd found wasn't about Jackie Chan's confession at all. It was about something else entirely, something so much worse that even now, his mind recoiled from the truth. Tommy's voice echoed across the decades. Some stories don't have heroes, William. Some stories only have victims and the people who failed to save them. Then what's really on that footage? Sarah asked. William closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to remember what he'd seen in those 18 terrible minutes. Bruce Lee collapsing, yes, but not from heat exhaustion or shock. The convulsions that followed, the desperate attempts at revival, the moment when everyone on that soundstage realized they were watching a legend die from something that should never have been in his system. And most damning of all, the conversation afterward, when the studio executives decided how the story would be told. The cover-up that began before Bruce's body was cold. It's not about betrayal, William said, his voice barely audible above the train's rhythm. It's about murder. And the man who just fed us that elaborate lie about Jackie Chan and the triads? He wasn't trying to scare us away from the truth. Sarah gripped his arm. Then what was he doing? The figure behind them was closer now, moving with the same controlled precision as the man they'd left on the platform. William realized with sick certainty that they'd been herded, manipulated, led exactly where someone wanted them to go. The tea shop, the subway, even Sarah's timely appearance, all of it orchestrated. He was changing the narrative, William said, making us think we understood what we'd found. If that recording of yours ever surfaces, people will assume Jackie Chan was involved in some triad conspiracy. They'll focus on that story instead of the real one. The train began to slow, approaching the next station. William could see more figures waiting on the platform, too many positioned too strategically to be coincidence. "What's the real story?" Sarah demanded. William looked at her then, really looked, and saw something that made his blood turn to ice. Her press credentials, which he'd only glimpsed in the chaos, weren't from Asia Pacific News. They were from Golden Harvest Studios, Raymond Chow's company, the same studio that had covered up Bruce Lee's death 50 years ago. "You're not a journalist," he said quietly. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her grip on his arm tightened. "I'm someone who's spent a very long time making sure certain truths stay buried, Mr. Chen, just like my colleague explained." The train shuddered to a stop, doors hissing open to reveal the waiting figures on the platform. William understood now that there had never been a safe house, never been a chance to escape. From the moment he'd accessed that vault, he'd been dancing to someone else's choreography, but they'd made one crucial mistake in their elaborate deception. They'd assumed he would be satisfied with their lies about Jackie Chan, that he would focus on the wrong conspiracy and miss the real horror hidden in those 18 minutes. The footage pressed against his hip like a burning coal, containing the truth they'd killed to protect. Bruce Lee hadn't died from natural causes or triad revenge. He'd been murdered by the very studio executives who'd made millions from his legend. William's hand moved instinctively to the emergency brake, muscle memory from decades of stunt work overriding conscious thought. The train lurched to a screaming halt between stations, throwing Sarah and the advancing figures off balance. In the chaos of sparks and shouting, he kicked open the emergency exit and dropped into the tunnel's darkness. The messenger bag slammed against his ribs as he ran. 18 minutes of damning footage that had cost him everything, his safety, his illusions, and now his last chance at redemption. Behind him, flashlight beams cut through the tunnel like searching fingers, but William knew these passages better than his pursuers. 30 years of exploring every corner of Hong Kong's film industry had taught him the city's hidden arteries, the forgotten spaces where truth could survive. He climbed through a maintenance access that led to the old Central District, emerging in an alley that smelled of fish sauce and desperation. His hands shook as he pulled out the backup phone he'd hidden in his jacket, a precaution that now seemed laughably inadequate against the forces arrayed against him. Tommy answered on the first ring. "I told you not to call me." "They murdered him, Tommy." William's voice cracked like breaking glass. "Raymond Chow, the Golden Harvest executives, they poisoned Bruce and then built their empire on his corpse." Silence stretched between them, filled with 30 years of carefully maintained distance. "I know," Tommy whispered finally. "I've always known." The words hit William harder than any physical blow. "You were there that day. You saw them do it." "I saw them panic afterward, saw them realize what they'd done." Tommy's breathing was ragged, the sound of a man whose secrets had finally found him. "They never meant to kill him, William. They just wanted to make him sick, force him to accept their terms for the American films. But they miscalculated the dosage and you said nothing. What was I supposed to say? That the most beloved figure in Hong Kong had been murdered by the people who were supposed to protect him? That would have torn the city apart. The riots, the investigations, it would have destroyed everything Bruce had built. William pressed his back against the alley wall, feeling the weight of his friend's cowardice, crushing whatever remained of their bond. "So you chose their version of the story. Let them turn his death into a mystery instead of a crime." "I chose survival." Tommy's voice hardened. "For all of us." "Do you think they would have stopped with Bruce? Every stuntman, every actor, every technician who knew the truth, we all would have disappeared. I had a family, William. I had people depending on me. And Bruce had people depending on him. Millions of them." The sound of approaching sirens echoed off the alley walls. William realized with bitter clarity that Tommy had been stalling, keeping him on the line long enough for them to trace the call. "They're offering you the same choice they gave me 30 years ago," Tommy continued, desperation bleeding into his voice. "Give them the footage, accept their silence money, and live. Or keep fighting a truth that died with Bruce and take everyone you love down with you." William thought of Emma, her bright laughter and fierce intelligence, the granddaughter who represented everything good he'd ever accomplished. He thought of the archive, 30 years of preserving Hong Kong's cinematic heritage, all of it meaningless if he couldn't preserve this one crucial truth. "Emma knows," he said quietly, and felt Tommy's sharp intake of breath through the phone. "I taught her too well, showed her how to read between the lines of history. She's already started asking questions about her grandfather's work, about the sealed collections. If something happens to me, she won't stop digging. William, don't. I'm not threatening anyone, old friend. I'm just pointing out that truth has a way of surviving, even when the people who carry it don't." He ended the call and smashed the phone against the alley wall, watching its screen shatter like his friendship with Tommy, like his faith in the industry that had defined his life. The sirens were closer now, and William knew he had minutes before they found him. But for the first time since discovering the footage, he felt something approaching peace. The elaborate deceptions, the false narratives about Jackie Chan and triad conspiracies, they were all just desperate attempts to control a story that had already begun writing itself, in teaching Emma to question everything, to dig deeper than surface explanations. He'd already planted the seeds of their downfall. The truth would survive, even if he didn't. William clutched the messenger bag tighter and stepped deeper into the maze of Hong Kong's forgotten spaces, carrying 18 minutes of justice toward whatever ending awaited. The alley opened onto Nathan Road, and William stepped into the neon-washed chaos of Sim Shat Sui, the messenger bag burning against his hip like a brand. 30 years of careful archival work, of preserving Hong Kong's cinematic legacy, had led to this moment, standing in the heart of the city with 18 minutes of footage that could topple empires built on Bruce Lee's grave. A black sedan pulled alongside the curb, its engine purring with expensive menace. The rear window descended, revealing Raymond Chow himself, older now, his hair silver white, but his eyes still holding the cold calculation that had turned him into Hong Kong's most powerful film executive. The same eyes that had watched Bruce Lee convulse on that soundstage 50 years ago and seen opportunity in tragedy. "Get in!" William Chow's voice carried the weight of decades, the authority of a man who had rewritten history according to his will. "It's time we finished this conversation." William's feet remained planted on the sidewalk, even as pedestrians flowed around him like water around a stone. "The conversation ended when you murdered him." "I saved him." Chow's expression never changed, but something flickered behind his eyes, the ghost of genuine belief. "Do you know what Bruce was becoming in those final months? Paranoid, erratic, making demands that would have destroyed everything we'd built together. He wanted complete creative control, wanted to expose the industry's financial arrangements, wanted to burn down the very system that had made him a legend. So you decided to burn him instead. I decided to preserve his legacy." Chow leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The Bruce Lee the world remembers, the philosopher-warrior, the bridge between East and West, that man exists because of choices I made in that hospital room. The alternative was watching him self-destruct in front of millions." William felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the terrible logic of Chow's justification. How many times had he himself chosen comfortable lies over difficult truths in his archival work? How many uncomfortable stories had he buried in the name of preserving cinematic heritage? "Tommy told you about Emma. It wasn't a question. Your granddaughter is brilliant. Reminds me of Bruce, actually. The same relentless curiosity, the same refusal to accept simple answers." Chow's smile was winter cold. "Which is why I'm going to offer you something I've never offered anyone before, the complete truth." Despite himself, William felt his resolve waver. 50 years of questions, of gaps in the historical record, of whispered rumors that had never quite made sense. The promise of answers was intoxicating. "Bruce wasn't poisoned," Chow continued. The footage you found shows him collapsing, yes, but not from any substance we administered. He was suffering from cerebral edema, swelling of the brain caused by medication he was taking for back pain, the same condition that killed him officially 2 weeks later. William's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new narrative with what he'd witnessed on the grainy film. Then why the cover-up? Why hide the footage? Because it also shows what happened afterward, the panic, the chaos, the moment when my partner suggested we let him die rather than risk the scandal of drug dependency destroying his image. Chow's voice carried the weight of genuine regret. I chose to save his life that day, William. Had him rushed to the hospital, covered up the seizure, protected his reputation. The irony is that he died anyway, 2 weeks later, from the same underlying condition. The world seemed to tilt around William as the implications crystallized. If Chow was telling the truth, then the footage wasn't evidence of murder. It was evidence of salvation. The conspiracy wasn't about killing Bruce Lee, it was about the desperate attempts to save him from his own self-destructive tendencies. You want me to believe you were the hero. I want you to understand that heroes and villains are luxuries history can't afford. Chow gestured toward the bag at William's hip. That footage contains my voice arguing with studio executives who wanted to let Bruce die for the insurance money. It contains my orders to call an ambulance, my threats against anyone who suggested otherwise. Release it, and you'll prove that the man who supposedly exploited Bruce Lee was actually the one who fought to save him. William's hands trembled as the weight of impossible choice settled on his shoulders. 30 years of believing he was the guardian of truth, only to discover that truth itself was a shifting, unreliable thing. Had he spent 3 decades hating the wrong man? Had his friendship with Tommy been destroyed by a misunderstanding? Emma will never stop looking, he said quietly. Then let her find this. Chow extended his hand toward the messenger bag. Let her discover that her grandfather was the man who chose justice over revenge, who preserved the complexity of truth rather than settling for the simplicity of conspiracy theories. The neon lights of Nathan Road painted everything in shades of red and gold, the colors of blood and money, of sacrifice and prosperity. William looked at Raymond Chow's outstretched hand and realized that 50 years after Bruce Lee's death, he was being asked to make the same impossible choice between protecting legends and exposing truth. The messenger bag felt heavier than ever as he finally understood. Sometimes the most devastating act isn't destroying the truth, it's revealing it.